Hi everybody. As they said, I'm a pre-seed B2B investor based in San Francisco, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to raise capital in Silicon Valley. So the first thing just to note is that when people ask about fundraising at the very early stage, are you really going to raise money? Probably not, actually. It's really hard to raise money from investors. And that may be because of the macro environment like right now, or just because of the competition like the previous few years. So for most entrepreneurs at the very early stages, you've got to be more reliant on your personal runway. So savings, perhaps you're lucky and you have access to more funds, more time, etc. Maybe you're working part-time, working on a startup part-time. Those kinds of things are the standard mechanisms. When I was in your position, and I really can't recommend this, I was running it on my credit card. Bad idea. But nevertheless, this is all the various things that people do versus actually raising money from investors. That's the reality. Now, the other thing is that you won't necessarily raise first from Silicon Valley investors. That, again, is very tough. It's tough to break into the network in a lot of ways. And it's tough to beat the crowd when there's, I probably receive about 3,000 companies coming to my inbox every year. I'm going to pick about 8 to 12 of those that I'm actually going to invest in. So it's a really tough probability ratio to work with. Much more likely you're going to raise money from people that you know, people that already believe in you regardless of the idea. So affinity. And that might also be, something where you may not know those people, but they may have some kind of association with you. Maybe they're from the same hometown. Maybe they went to the same university as you did. And then if you're thinking about raising money in Silicon Valley, you have to think about why US investors would care. Most of us in Silicon Valley have lots of opportunities right here. So why would we want to invest in a company that's based in the United Kingdom? Are you based in the United Kingdom? Are you already here? Are you selling to US customers? Is it such an exciting opportunity in Europe that it's going to become a huge opportunity in the United States as well? So really think about why a US investor would care before you even, try to target investors out here, because we are kind of picky because of the number of opportunities that are available. And so for most startups, including myself, when I was in your shoes, I had to come here. I have moved, my life to Silicon Valley, and most people, that's probably what you have to do if you want to raise money. You're going to have to be in the United States or Canada. You're going to have to base your business here, probably move your family here if that's what you already have, and that's a big commitment. US startups do certainly raise more money. And that is a big benefit in a lot of ways. But it's also not the only way to make money for yourself, right? I think that there is this tendency to believe that Elon Musk's path of raising billions and billions of dollars is the only way. And I don't think that's reality at all. You can raise a small amount of money and keep the business running forever and making maybe a few $1 million a year. And that's actually a really good lifestyle. I certainly can't be upset about that being a VC. Then also, there are people who maybe raise a small amount of money, but sell their company not for a public number like $1 billion, but maybe for $100 million. And that outcome, maybe because they've only done 10, 20% dilution, actually is even bigger than what it would have been had they raised more money and gone public. And that is actually my story as well. So in a couple of the companies where I had wins, if we'd taken the money earlier, if we'd taken the earlier acquisition, we would have actually made more cash despite having less prestige, less press. Maybe I wouldn't be talking to you today. So the 5 headlines are for when you're thinking about raising money in Silicon Valley, like personal runway over the macro environment. It's much more important to think about how much time you can give yourself. Affinity over Silicon Valley. So think about who the people you might be able to talk to who would believe in you regardless of whether or not you have experience doing this versus people where it's much more competitive. Why would US investors care? Are you ready to move? And then just because US startups raise more, that may not be the best path for you and your business.
Ash, thank you. That's great. That's 5 really key actionable insights that we can all work on. I'm really keen to dive in and just dig into each of those before everyone else gets a chance. But a reminder, QR code that you scanned before, the same form still works. Get your devices out, start putting the questions in, and then I can start putting them to Ash, because I'm sure you will want to ask some questions as well, but I'm going to rob the mic and get in there first. So the first one, looking at that personal runway over the macro environment. So in this context, in the university, lots of researchers, student founders, for them, personal runway means time, but no cash. And so what are the most valuable things that someone who's got time but no cash, what are the best things that they can do to maximize their opportunities right at the start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you've got a lot of time on your hands and you want to be talking to customers, so you can think about commercialization opportunities and find those problems that people are willing to pay for easily, so you can then build for just that one problem. The other thing to do if you've got a lot of time is obviously you can split that time between building and generating cash yourself, maybe doing consulting, maybe doing part-time work, etc., to try and extend runway. But by and large, you know, I think that there's a tendency when if you're talking to people who have a lot of technical ability to just be building, and that's what they're using their time for. That's not necessarily the best use of your time if you want to build a business. It would be on the fundraising aspect, or on, more importantly, on talking to customers and trying to get something live with them, or extending your runway through consulting.
Yeah, fantastic. And the second one, you talked about affinity before Silicon Valley, that, you know, kind of go to the people where there's already that link. Well, as a founder, you did this first as a founder before turning investor. How did you find that affinity? How did you build that network? Because often people are starting from scratch. Now, what were the steps that you took to start leaning into that?
Right. Well, so here we go. Is the story. So the first investor in my last company, SendHub, was an investor in Clout, which was one of my wins, KLOUT, one of the first social media analytics company back when that was allowed. So I saw this guy walk into the office. I was like, I know that guy. That guy's an investor. And I stopped him before he went to the door. And he was like, you're being weird, but why don't you come for lunch? Because you seem like you'd be someone who's obviously bold enough to do something stupid like start a company. And sure enough, we talked for the next couple of years or so, and then he ended up being the first check. So pushing those kinds of things, I think taking opportunities, making your own luck was my story. But obviously, and I didn't come from a financially wealthy background, so I didn't have any family money coming in for those kinds of things, no friends' money. But it was the points of affinity, like, oh, this is an investor in a company that I also worked at, so they would give me the time of day, they'd give me 30 seconds to explain that I'd love to chat with them about starting a company in the future, which got me to lunch, which got me, 5 minutes in a group of 6 people for him to say, all right, email me once a quarter. Don't do it more than that, right?
That's really cool. And then flip the other side of the table. You turn founder, turned investor. What kind of personal affinity do you look for in the founders that you connect with?
So I tell people to use personal affinity because I think it does work. I don't really care about it so much because I think that the personal affinities that I have of like being in Silicon Valley, coming from a computer science background, those aren't the ones that are necessarily going to be good for my investment thesis. I'm looking for people that don't necessarily always fit the profile. So I actually I tell people use that. It works. It definitely does. But for me, I don't want to tell people, oh, do X, Y, Z, because I'm not really looking for that. I'm looking for you to have a technical advantage, to be really passionate about your project, and to have some demonstration that your project is interesting to customers, that you can commercialize it.
That's great. You also you said third point was, why would US investors care? And I guess the broader question is, why would any investor care?
Right.
What do you think are the best ways that founders can kind of calibrate? What does a potential investor really care about? So if they're going to try and speak to someone, how do you work out what drives them?
Right. So investors care about a few things. First of all, they care about market size. So it doesn't matter how good you are. If you're in a small market, let's say it's a market that's only going to be £100 million in the UK per year, it's very hard to build a big business, even if you own that entire market. So that's something investors really, really care about. The next thing is that investors like technology. They like technology advantages, but they care about customer feedback. They want to see something that demonstrates a customer advantage. So a lot of people build technology, but it's technology in search of a product. What we're looking for as investors is customer demand, desire for a solution that you can provide through your technology, and demonstrations of that, like, oh, we've got 5 people who are desperate for this. If we could supply it tomorrow, they would pay us. That kind of thing is really exciting. And then the last thing is resumes. I mean, investors love experience at fancy startups, at big companies. They love you demonstrating that you've done something yourself, like building your own business, or maybe doing something in the summer during college, etc. So demonstrations of your prowess on your resume are things that, you know, most investors at the early stage, like myself, that's what we're going to base almost everything on, and then references around that.
Great. And fourth, you said, are you ready to move? Now, you made that move. At some point, you took the plunge, you moved your whole life out to Silicon Valley. Now, talk us through, how did you make that decision? And what did that look like in particularly the first few months after you took that plunge?
Right. So it was, I think my family tells me that I'd made the decision when I was about 8 years old, after the first glimpse of Disneyland on maybe like a VHS tape. I was like, I'm living there. So it'd been a long time coming. So I think that I'd always wanted to have that opportunity. And once I decided, I was in the military before, once I decided I wasn't going to go back, then I decided Silicon Valley was pretty much the place that I wanted to go. Land of opportunity, home of the brave. Nowadays, obviously, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because we live in a more remote world. For me, for early months after making that decision were very difficult because the U.S. immigration system is a very deep and dark minefield. It is hard to get through. It can take months, if not years, and a lot of sponsorship and money is required from your potential employer. So I had to do a lot of interviews that didn't go very well, where I was basically asking people to pay tens of thousands of dollars up front in order to just hire me, which is obviously not that exciting when there's a lot of other candidates available. So eventually, you know, I just made it a numbers game. I did as many interviews as I could and got lucky that a couple of companies were willing to sponsor that. Once I got here, it was very tough. No credit card, no car. You had hard to get an apartment, all that kind of stuff. It's not easy. It was, it required an awful lot of determination early on. And I think that it's a lot easier now because a lot of those things, like those pieces of infrastructure, are available for new immigrants. But you should not underestimate the challenge of being very far away from your family and friends in a new place when your only reason to be there is a job. That's a lot. And it was certainly a lot for me at the time.
And I mean, certainly some of the founders that we've supported, they've gone through like Skydeck at Berkeley or YC. Right. They said actually one of the advantages of going through an accelerator program is then the sponsorship to come out and go through immigration.
Huge deal. I mean, Skydeck are saints on this front. Like the Skydeck facility, they have an office space for you. They have a place where you can go all the time. Y-Combinator is great because you have the opportunity to raise so much money and the community is so large, but you don't get office space. They've got the familiarity to get you through all the various processes, but you are still finding a place for yourself in a new country right at the very beginning. And again, that's quite exciting. So yeah, I am a big believer in both of those two programs, and great examples of places you should go first if you're thinking about coming into the United States, because those people who've seen and done this 20, 30 times a year, those are the people you want to be talking to.
Yeah, great. And then your last point was US startups raise more money, but does that necessarily mean it's better? From your perspective, what are the pros and cons? If you're someone based in the UK, whether they're British or international, what are the pros and cons of looking at raising in the US versus raising here in the UK?
Well, US companies raise at higher valuations and on better terms. So there's less onerous terms, usually less board seat requirements, less governance requirements, etc. But that's not always a good thing, as we're learning with the FTX saga right now. So, you know, good governance there might have saved this guy's career and maybe from a couple of decades in jail, along with everyone else's money, of course. So those are the advantages and disadvantages from that perspective. I think that obviously the distance and the expectations is another factor. So if you are working with a US investor and you're based in the United Kingdom, like I'm going to want to talk to you at a time that I want to talk to you, right? That challenges a lot of your schedules. We're doing this in the evening for you guys, but obviously you wouldn't want to work every evening for your life with US investors. Similarly, as a US investor, usually we deal with larger check sizes, larger investments, but that also means larger expectations. So if you wanted to sell your company for £100 million, I'd be like, no, I don't want you to do that. That's a bad idea. That makes me look like I picked someone who's not ambitious enough. I don't want that. I want you to keep going. Now, that sounds crazy, right? Maybe this isn't something people want to hear, but the reality is I'm looking for 1,000x, 10,000x wins versus my initial investment. That's what you're signing up for with US venture capital, not for everybody at all. That's what breeds these kinds of behaviors that people don't like to see now. And again, plenty of our companies out of Sterling Road have sold for between 20 and $100 million. I've been mad about it, but those founders have nice houses. They live great lives. So they're still my friends.
No, that's a good chat. And I remember, you've talked and I've heard plenty of stories of chief exec founders of companies that are growing, they're doing a good job, they've raised, that really ambitious Silicon Valley VC, and then suddenly one morning they come in, the VC change tune, they're not delivering the outcomes that they were expecting or were wanting, and so suddenly change of ship, chief exec's out, new person's in, everything's changed, and becomes pretty brutal if you're not delivering the results.
That story happened to the letter at a company that Google ended up acquiring in the satellite space. A friend of mine at Stanford ran that company, built it, came in one morning, and his VC is sat at his desk with a guy next to him and says, "This is the new CEO."
Tough times. Right.
And on a high note, folks.
So do you still want to raise money in Silicon Valley? Well, it's good to
Let's talk about where I should send this check.
So I can see there's a few questions starting coming on. Reminder, everyone, chuck your questions in if you want me to ask your question. So from this, I can see Tom has asked, has the pandemic changed behavior? Has it changed your behavior? Are you investing without meeting the team in person? Kind of what difference has it brought to you?
Huge difference. Almost opposite switch change in terms of how meetings are done now. So 2 years ago, I'd tell people to do all your meetings in person. Now you have to accept that your first meeting will almost always be over Zoom. About 30–40% of the investments we make are now with people that we've never met in person. No real intention to do that unless the opportunity arises. And then that means the volume has increased though, right? So it's much harder to make it through the noise, through the crowd, because everyone can now reach out. Everyone is eligible for a meeting because I'm much more willing to invest internationally, for example, talking to y'all now. All that kind of stuff, it means that there's just a much larger number of people that you're competing against.
So let me look at this. So German has asked, what type of industries have you already invested in, and which ones have been the best bets for you so far?
So the industries that I've invested the most time in are healthcare and manufacturing. And we've had highs and lows in both. Like, we've got some of our best companies are in those spaces, and also some of the fastest failures as well. So manufacturing is in the Stone Age. A lot of it, if you go to a factory in Southampton or in the surrounding area, you'll see a lot of pen and paper still used over and over again. And that's got to change. And it's got to change soon. And obviously, a lot of people who are coming onto the labor market now are device oriented. So I think that's a huge opportunity. And then healthcare, obviously, we're just getting older and sicker. We look after ourselves less and less, it seems. But our desire to live longer and our willingness to pay for that is going up and up. And so everyone wants to be comfortable. They want to live forever. And we've got disposable income to do that. And I think that a la carte healthcare, even in single payer models like the UK, is going to be a huge part of the future.
That's great. And I can see a couple of questions. Tarbit and Nick are both asked sort of similar questions, which is, how do you decide a company is worth investing in? Given you've got so many options, you talked about an attrition from 3,000 to maybe 10 or 15 that you'd invest in. Like, how do you decide from so many different options? And Nick specifically said, how do you balance between the idea, the concept, the technology, and the person, the team? Like, how do you weigh up those decisions?
Yeah, so I'm usually looking for companies that are B2B. They're going to be based in the US, UK, or Canada. So that's going to trim down a lot of people. Then there's the stage. I usually want to own maybe 5 to 10% of the company by investing £500,000 to £1 million. So over a couple of different stages of the company. So if you're already generating millions of pounds a year in revenue, then it's unlikely that I'm going to be a fit. It might be, you're probably too far along for me. So I've got to meet them really early. And then I'm looking for a technology advantage in most cases, or working in a legacy market like legal tech or manufacturing. And then in terms of once we have all those ingredients in place, then I want to work with founders for 90 days. So that's the unusual part of what we do at Sterling Road, is we don't make these shotgun weddings. We do 90 days of working together every 2 weeks. During that time, I'm going to get a good idea of how resilient you are. You're going to get a good idea of how wild it is to work with us. And then if those two things work out, then we want to invest. So a lot of that does ultimately come down to the team, but there's no specific like bar with the team that I'm looking for. It's just you've got to show us your incredible prowess through one of these various means of opportunity that we're giving you.
That's great. And Alice asked the question, so in that context, in the so many thousands, how does anyone really stand out? Like what are the things that people can do that really help them stand out from the crowd?
Well, a lot of people don't make it clear what they do. A lot of people don't, I mean, just it's basic stuff. I've actually got a blog post on this. It's called How to Cold Email an Investor. So just Google my name, Ash Ruston, that title, and you'll find it. And it'll cover like the key points, which is you mentioned why you emailed me. I demonstrated that you've researched that I only do B2B investments. I invest in this sector. Okay, so you actually care. It's not just a full template. Then you're going to give me the high-level information on your business without shame or trying to hide it, right? So I can make a quick decision. And then you're going to give me the deck so I can dig in more if I'm interested, as well as maybe a couple of opportunities to get on your calendar right away if I'm excited to do so. So it's not that hard, actually. It's just that a lot of people deceive themselves into thinking they want to send thousands of emails, thousands of bad emails. And instead, rather than maybe sending 10 good emails a day, and you might get a 30–40% response rate from that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So Rod has asked the question, what are your thoughts on the fake it till you make it attitude, particularly considering things like the Theranos examples and some of the big crashes and shockers that we've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I don't work in consumer investing for this reason. So I think that if you're marketing to consumers, or if you're doing things in like crypto, if you're trying to astroturf users and usage, then that is a very dangerous game. I like the companies that I invest in to make money, and so they sell real valuable services to other businesses, make them more efficient, and then that's just a fairly standard transaction. It's been going on for thousands of years. So I think that you can keep it simple and then just add in the ingredient of software or hardware as the innovation, and that's more than enough. We don't need to make business more complicated than that, in my opinion. And yeah, it's a shame. It's a terrible shame. I mean, and crypto was one of my personal wins, and certainly been caught up in plenty of this. It's quite exciting. Not a fun conversation with your spouse, by the way.
Certainly moves quickly. So Andy's asked, with the increase in Zoom-based meetings, we touched on this a little bit, but do you see more money going out of the US to UK companies or other international destinations than perhaps before the pandemic?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, and now as a UK company in particular, if you're willing to have like a Delaware entity or an office in New York or something, you can really, or you have US customers, you can really entice US investors, because especially if the time zone isn't going to be that bad, maybe you're not talking about London to San Francisco, maybe you're talking about New York to London, then that's a lot more manageable. And it's, there's investors are looking for great opportunities. If you've got an exciting company and you're obviously usually pitching a much lower valuation, then that is something that is going to potentially attract investors, and you should give it a shot. And if those investors are good enough or excited enough to give you the feedback on what corporate structure they might want to see, then that's something you can take to the next investor for your conversation. Well, we're considering this structure. What do you think?
That's great. So Sam has asked a bit more of a personal question. What does a typical day look like for you?
So I'm a solo GP. That means that I run this whole fund by myself with a lot of sort of supporting people, but no one else is making investment decisions. So it's 6 days a week. I usually get up at about 5:30. I'll be done with the first round of emails by about 7:30, go to the gym to 8:30, and then calls start at 9 or 8:45 as today, Ben. And then usually go till about 4 or 5 p.m. with sometimes I have to step out for lunch, so I might get a 2-hour gap because I've got to go in and out. But usually done by 4 or 5 p.m. Dinner with the wife, and then gym again if possible, and then 2 hours of email before bed. Usually around 11.
You love email then?
I mean, you've got no choice. It's like where those companies are coming in, right? So I produce this content so I don't have to go out and drink with these VCs all day.
That's great. And that maybe segues into Andy's asked the question, is cold calling for investment or perhaps cold emailing a good strategy for trying to get that investment?
It's amazingly powerful, right? Like if you think about it, even if you don't know anybody, and even if you're only getting a 10% response rate, there are thousands of investors out there. So you're guaranteeing yourself hundreds of meetings if you're willing to do that work, literally. So it really is a guarantee of success, cold emailing. As long as you are willing to do the work and get a good email out to people who are publishing their email address, of which most of us do, then you're going to receive a double-digit response rate, and that's going to guarantee you access to those people that you wouldn't otherwise meet. So no reason not to. The other thing that's starting to work more and more is LinkedIn as well, sending short messages on LinkedIn or other social media channels. It didn't work before the pandemic, but I think as people like me have sort of aged out, and the new generation of investors is people in their sort of 25 to 35-year-olds, they grew up on social media. So social media messaging is standard practice. And there you can do multiple touches very easily. Add them, message them, like a post, and then they see your name a lot. It's very powerful in terms of recency bias.
I'm with you on struggling on social media messaging, so maybe I'm a dinosaur. But so Adam's asked the question, and you hear this a lot. How powerful is the concept of fear of missing out, FOMO, when it comes to investing?
It's the only tool you have at the early stage, is the opportunity is going to go away. So it's incredibly powerful, but generating it is also very difficult. What you need to do is be exciting to an investor. Either the team is exciting and you're generating a lot of inbound interest just because people know who you are, or maybe you've developed some technology that when you show it to people, they are incredibly excited instantly, or maybe people are using your product an awful lot. And so they're talking about it with investors and they know that, oh, this is a product people rely on. If you have one of those things, then yeah, FOMO is easy. But without those, it's incredibly hard, and you'll be asking these kinds of questions.
Fantastic. So there was a question as well around just how much do you or other VCs that you're connected with invest in emerging markets, developing economies versus US, UK, established markets?
It's very rare. I'd say it's probably about 1 in 20 that does it. Mostly it's angel investors that I know that do that. So plenty of the people who are, for example, investors in my fund, investors in a couple of other funds, maybe they're a VC themselves, they do a little angel investing on the side. Those are the kinds of people that might also do 1 or 2 investments in developing markets. Maybe they've got an investment in Nigeria, an investment in Mexico, an investment in Brazil. That would be the standard profile that I see. I have 1 or 2 of my friends out of maybe 200 or 300 in my emerging manager network, or old dude network now, I guess, are investors specifically in Africa or North Africa or in the Middle East. But it's a very small percentage. So usually those companies do better on the fundraising side if they create an entity in the United States and then operate their locale as a subsidiary.
Now, it's a sensitive subject. You mentioned the old dude network. It's the elephant in the room in tech. It's definitely the elephant in the room in the VC market. There's so many VCs. It's old white guys that are investing the money, and they invest it in people that look like them, look like you, look like me. What do you see are the trends around, whether it's ethnic minorities, whether it's women in tech? How do you see them faring in raising VC money? Well,
it's not getting easier, unfortunately, right now, I don't think. I think, unfortunately, the reality is that with this year, as the macro environment has deteriorated, I've seen a significant drop-off in overlooked founders reaching out, presumably because they were under potentially more economic pressure before, and so the opportunities are now even fewer for them to take the risk. So that's the sad part about it. I think we are seeing more and more female solo GPs and more and more female VCs becoming partners, but the ratio is still absolutely terrible across the board. And I wish it was going to change, but I don't see any path in the near future where that is going to. If you are a female founder, you should definitely not let that deter you. If you're a founder from an overlooked background of any ilk, don't let that deter you. but nevertheless, you will have to accept that you will be one of the very few. And then you should seek out investors who, publish their numbers around this kind of stuff, seek out investors who make it clear in their events that these are diverse events. And those investors are obviously much more likely to be receptive versus the standard pattern matching. But it's tough. I wish it were different. I don't have a good answer, except we try and do our best. I don't want to go into blowing my own horn on that. You can look up the data if you so wish, but it's a deep problem here. And please, don't let it deter you, because you will be a guiding light for the next generation after.
And a selfish question, perhaps for me, what are things you think that accelerators like ours or universities more generally can do that would be positive in that space?
Sure. So what I do, and that's the only thing I can really advise on, is that I have to prioritize people from those groups. So I do the math on what it should look like in terms of our demographics. And so we maybe have 25% of our founders are female. It should obviously be closer to 40 to 60% based on standard population metrics. So when female founders come into our inbox, we have to make a special effort. That means if they are more difficult to schedule with and might have fallen off, we don't let that happen. We make sure we get those first meetings. Maybe they'll come back after 6 months or 9 months sooner for a request for another meeting. We would do that meeting with an overlooked founder versus someone perhaps of a different demographic that wasn't as that was more pervasive in our portfolio already. So you have to just make the effort. It means making difficult decisions on your time, and I don't think a lot of people want to do that, especially not in my position, right? I produce this content, people hit my inbox. What else should I do, right? But we have to go out and make those efforts in order to make sure. And the other thing is, of course, that when you find someone who's good, who is in an overlooked demographic, you're going to find that there's a lot of competition for that founder as well. So once they get over a particular hump of traction or ability or demonstrable technology, it becomes a very quick feeding frenzy, I've noticed. So you'll find that it's actually an interesting set of behaviors around this. Our policy is to be proactive. I know it's not popular.
And it's interesting you talk about the feeding frenzy. That's part of the positive narrative, isn't it? For founders from underlooked groups, actually, if you can punch through and make those contacts, there's a lot of investment funds that are specifically looking to improve their ratios. And so absolutely fighting over that particular demographic. So, you can use that to your advantage.
Amen. And every lever you have, right? Like after all the baggage that the universe has heaped on you to create these terrible situations, every lever you have to bring it back the balance. Don't hesitate.
Ash, it's been absolutely fantastic to hear your advice and your tips. I'm really keen to hear your pitch really around what you do at Sterling Road, just in clear, simple terms, so that people understand exactly what you do, how they could connect with you. As a bit of a segue to that, Sam has asked a question. So this will be the last question from the audience, which is, what role do you take in the companies that you invest in? So Sam is a founder of a startup. He's clearly interested in what potential investment he might take. So you could be addressing your response directly to someone who might be interested in taking investment. Sure. But tell us about yourself. Tell us about Sterling Road.
Yeah, so the way Sterling Road works with founders is every 2 weeks for 30 minutes. So we're always available pretty much throughout your entire journey. We do 3 different forms of investment. So grants, this is free money, genuinely free money, £1,000 for whatever project you want to work on, usually software projects. But if you're interested in building something out over the summer, you need a little help to get that started, we'd love to offer that to University of Southampton students. And so please apply to the grant program. That's one option. And then we do group sessions every 2 weeks for that. Then we do the idea stage investments. Those are up to £150,000. Starts off with maybe a £25,000 to £50,000 check. And those are for people who are just going full time, you and your team, and all you need is an idea, just a deck. And that's enough to get us started, hopefully. And we'll work with you again every 2 weeks for 30 minutes, up for years if necessary, in order to get you through to the next stage. And then the last investment round for us is the pre-seed. That's £250,000 as an investment. And usually we work with founders for 90 days before that. So again, every 2 weeks for 30 minutes, talking about our specialist subjects, goals, fundraising, recruiting, early sales, whatever's on your mind. And then we'll make a decision if it's mutually interesting. Now, over time, we invest tens of millions of dollars in the company. Last year, we wrote a check for $16 million in one of our best companies. So we really do stay with our companies for a very long period of time and try and be supportive. And we've got the capital to do so.
Ash, that's absolutely fantastic. Before there's an applause, I can't resist. There's one other question. Esther has spent a long time putting this question in, and it's one that's close to my heart as well, which is this. What do you see as the pros and cons of investing B2B versus B2C? Because we hear a lot of talk around that. And then particularly, why do you prefer B2B?
Right. Well, B2C companies are bigger, right? Apple, Google, Facebook, etc., Tesla. So you can build a much bigger business by being B2C. The reason why I like B2B is because there's a formula. There is a clear formula for how you build a business from idea to your first $1 million in revenue. That's our specialist area. And I can take you through that. There's no magic to it. It doesn't require any overwhelming amounts of talent. If you are willing to grind on a business and figure out the right problem to solve based on your skill set for your team, then we can get you to build a really exciting $1 million business. And that is very repeatable. So I love that. I love the fact that we can make that happen, iterate on the process, guide people through to what they dream of building, their own business. And I like the fact that it's not quite as much alchemy as just rolling the dice. Now, I will say that with all of that said, all of this talk about B2B, you look at my top 3 valuation companies, they're all B2C. All these founders pivoted, all of them. So I invested in all of them B2B, and they all pivoted off to do B2C companies later. And now they're massive companies. And so when I say this, I have to qualify it.
Ash, thank you so much. It's been absolutely brilliant to hear from you. A big round of applause, please, for Ash.